Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. I am Tim Hannon, and with me is my co-host.
And I'm Steve Wirt.
And this is the show where we dive into Pittsburgh sports history. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a really fun and really memorable time and era of Pittsburgh baseball in the late 80s and early 90s. And we're also going to talk about the way it all sort of culminated with the unfortunate events of Wednesday, October 14th, 1992, which is a day that will live in infamy in Pittsburgh sports history, will never be forgotten by us fans who lived through it. Before we started, Steve, I just wanted to ask you, what's kind of your memories of Pittsburgh baseball and the Pirates during this time?
During the 80s?
During sort of like the 80s, late 80s, early 90s.
Well, I remember in 1987 going to like 30 Pirate games, and which is funny because that whole summer my dad was unemployed. It was like on unemployment, so like we're really broke. But you could go down to Three River Stadium if you took a Coke can, like a Diet Coke or whatever Coke you liked. You could get into the stadium for two people for like $2. And like sit in those, like, remember Three River Stadium had like the brown seats out in like whatever the
you
left
needed
center.
like a telescope to see home plate.
Yeah. So we'd sit out there, and oh my gosh, I still have the scorebooks. My dad used to keep score. I learned how to keep score, and just like great like father-son moments. And the Pirates, I do remember the Pirates stunk early in '87, and then like it really got exciting because later in that year they went on this big run, and they went from like last place in the division to like not first place but little. They had been eliminated, but it was still kind of like 87 was like, oh, this team might be, and I think that's the year they traded Pena too.
Yes, we'll get into that for sure.
Yeah,
it was the year, and they turned. That was like their. That was their 100th season, and I remember their
1887, like the old-fashioned Pirate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's cool. You had like you said, the father-son moments. This era for me, like that late 80s, early 90s, man. So I was born same as you. I was born in the late 70s, and so around this time, just like you, I was in that like coming of age time where you're transitioning from being like a little kid to being a teenager. And man, baseball, I loved baseball so much. I collected baseball cards. I can still remember like what the 1990 Nolan Ryan Donruss card looks like,
That's one of my favorite pitchers too. I love Nolan.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Well, I remember my friend would come over and we would play wiffle ball, and he was kind of like, he was more nerdy like about baseball. Like he knew the lineups, and he knew two of the lineups. So he knew the Pirates and for some reason the Houston Astros. So somebody would have like we'd go through the lineup pretending, oh yeah, it's Dale Berra or whoever was on the 1986 Pirates. And like so, someone would have to be the Houston Astros. So I think Billy Allman hit a home run over my house. That was the first time that ever happened.
Nice.
That was really me, but yeah, it was when Billy Allman's spot in the order was up. So,
well, and that's the way I was too. Like my brother and I, the whole summer we would go outside, we'd play catch, or we'd go up to the ball field by our house with our friend Tony, and we'd play like home run derby. Like there was only three of us, we couldn't play a real game, so we'd do like home run derby.
Ghost Man on second.
No, it was just home run derby. Like you get like 5 at bats and see how many home runs you could hit over the little fence that was there.
Yeah, there was just two of us, and I don't know how we did like. I think we would just do like pitcher's hand, or like if you caught the ball, or you would be out. If you didn't get the first by the time you got the ball.
And we would. That's how we spent our summers, and then my parents would let us stay up late in the summers because we didn't have school, and we'd stay up really late to watch Baseball Tonight on ESPN, to watch like all the highlights. And so there were some seasons where I probably saw the highlight of every single like baseball game over the summer.
Wow.
Because I'd stay up to watch it.
I never got that much. I remember more like my dad, because they were showing this when there was no sports on. They were showing old This Week in Baseballs. And I remember like my dad's an early seat person. There's the show up like third inning. There's the like show up an hour before the game. My dad's a show up the hour before the game kind of guy. So they would always play like This Week in Baseball before the game.
Yeah.
So I remember like, Mel, how about that? You
Yeah,
know, the St.
yeah.
Louis Cardinals are really good again. How about that? You
Yeah,
know?
I remember that. I remember that. I used to love the music that would play at the end of that show. Yes, yes, yes,
Maybe we
exactly.
should put that at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, seriously, and that was
See how mad we can make Major League Baseball.
and I remember and see like probably like your friend that was nerdy about baseball. I could have told you in the middle of that time. I could have told you who the utility infielder was for the Kansas City Royals. I knew so much about baseball and I loved baseball, and I think as I was putting together this episode, it was kind of bittersweet because like so many great warm memories of that time, but then like to remember how it all kind of ended and how it changed everything.
Well, just even the economics, like, yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like so old man, and I guess I'm gonna get a little old man here. Like, there's a couple things that changed there. Like, you used to be able to get a Pirate game for $1. Even back in 1987, that was cheap.
Right.
And like now, you couldn't get in and out of it. I remember I took my family to a Pirate game like a year or so ago, and if I spent less than $300, I'm probably not that far off.
Yes.
I mean, between the tickets and the food and and they weren't even great. I was in the upper deck of PNC Park. It was a great field, but I mean, how many games can an average person do like that a year? Like there would be no way me and my dad could go to like, even if we sat in the left field seats for $10, like, do like 30 games. Like It had to be 30 games that year. We did so many games.
Yeah, yeah, and so this was kind of the end of that era too. I mean, going all the way back to Forbes Field, like they used to talk about at Forbes Field, how if the game was like in the sixth inning, sometimes they would just open the gate and let you in.
Yeah. Well, you used to be able to sneak down. People still do it because I remember doing that. I mean, like sneaking down to the better seats, like after the fourth or fifth inning. Like the ushers don't care.
Right.
If somebody was sitting there, they'd be sitting there by now. Yeah.
So yeah, just like that was for Steve and I, who are about the same age. I mean, that was just like that was our childhood, and this time frame for the Pirates, it's when the Pirates finally got good, and it was so fun to not only be a baseball fan, but then have a good team to root for.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen until the late '80s. So let's go backwards a little. Let's go back to the most of the 1980s, when the Pirates are just a complete train wreck. We did an episode about the '80s Steelers and how they stunk. I'm sure we could do an episode about the '80s Penguins or some of the pit teams and how bad they stunk. I really feel like the Pirates are at a lower point than any of the other teams in Pittsburgh, because not only do they stink, but there's so much garbage going on off the field. So
I would say even especially after '84 when Mario, because like Mario kind of solidified the Penguins, but there was nobody really liked that for the Pirates.
Right. Yeah. And then in 1985 they have the Pittsburgh drug trials, and we won't go into detail about what that was. But if you're not familiar, there was basically a huge cocaine scandal in baseball, and Pittsburgh was at the center of all of it.
Yeah, Chuck Tanner, the World Series manager, gets fired because of it, because he didn't know who that guy in the trench coat was. It was like, this is like a guy like just hanging out in the clubhouse.
Right.
Like after games, I don't know who he is. Like,
right.
But okay, you just let anybody in.
Yeah, it was bad. The attendance is awful. And then Steve, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about this. The ownership turmoil.
It culminated in like the ownership really equals like stability and then winning. And like if you look at the different franchises, the ones that are successful and not successful, like the first key you almost always have to have is some sort of ownership. And the Pirates had that with a guy named John Galbraith, who bought the team for Barney Dreyfuss. And that was all the way back in 1946. And he's probably the most successful owner of the Pirates still to this day. They win 3 World Series while he's there. They're really good in the 70s. The Reds were a little better. They really stunk in the 50s, but they still had Ralph Kiner, so they still had a good player. He brought Branch Rickey, and, Galbraith really was a successful owner. Well, in 85, 86, I don't know if he had died, but his family decided to get out of the baseball business. And Oh, another fun fact was Bing Crosby was part owner of the Pirates. I don't know if we've mentioned that before.
That is a fun fact.
Yeah, Bing Crosby. And I think Time Warner owned like at that time 48% of. I don't know how that worked, but I guess Galbraith needed some money and he sold 48% of the Pittsburgh Pirates to Ted Turner. I don't know, or is that Ted? I don't know. I don't know all the ins and outs of '80s business dealings, but at that point the Pirates are rumored to leave town. Now it wasn't like the Penguins where like. There was like, oh, they're moving to city X, like they're like it's Kansas City or San Diego. Well, San Diego had a team, Kansas City or like Miami or whoever didn't have a team back then. But it was just like that scared everybody because the Pirates, like you said, had almost been there 100 years, and like I think too, it played into like Pittsburgh was in this downturn from the 70s. And like everybody was leaving town in the 80s. Like Pittsburgh was having a tough time keeping. All the steel mills had closed, and it was kind of hadn't transitioned into the healthcare boom that it became. So that kind of played into like the psyche of the town. Well, we don't want to lose the Pirates. That'll be like another thing we've lost. So the Richard Caligiuri, who's the mayor at the time, he forms a consortium of corporations, and this is the oddest ownership, and it's like Alcoa, PPG, Westinghouse, Carnegie Mellon. So I guess these are the corporations that haven't moved out and are here for the long haul, so they want to have a team to keep, Pittsburgh, as a first-class city, We don't want to be, one of them second-class ones that don't have a baseball team. So it's kind of and this group owns the Pirates until 1996. So I don't even know who really. I guess who I don't know who the general manager was. Was it Sid Thrift by then? I don't know. Yeah. I mean, but there really was no ownership per se of the. You know what I mean? There's no. I mean, imagine with like a group of people like that, it's probably hard to have a direction. Like does the CEO of like Westinghouse or U.S. Steel have time to like debate like trading Tony Pena? Like, doesn't he have better things to do, like worry about like running his steel mills or getting aluminum,
Right, and they had basically like a management team. So there was like a team president. There was not very different than it is today. It's just that there wasn't like that single owner that like kind of made all the decisions. And that's actually, you mentioned Sid Thrift. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That's one of the things that gets him in trouble is that there is people he has to answer to.
Well, I could see why you think there wouldn't be.
Yeah. So you're right, and it's the Pirates are almost like skirting around irrelevance at this point, and like you said, Steve, all those people that grew up on Forbes Field and Roberto Clemente, and like they're all leaving town, and now you have a whole generation of kids like you and me that are starting to, may not even have a baseball team to root for. So, like you said, that forming that consortium definitely saved the team. And then in 1986, they really start to turn things around. They hire a manager by the name of Jim Leyland. And Steve, I want to get your take on this. I would say if I was going to put together a list of the top 5 all-time Pittsburgh's coaches in any sport, I really think I'd have to put Leyland in there. What do you think?
I think it would be the most Pittsburgh of them all. Between the smoking in the dugout, and then he threw milk on the wall one time. Yeah, he got mad and threw milk on the wall. But is he? I think he still lives in Pittsburgh.
I think he might. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know if he's from here. I don't know where Jim Leyland's even from. But top 5. Okay, so we're gonna say top 5 coaches. Okay, so
who would you put above him? I guess.
Well, Chuck Noll.
Sure.
I don't know, Cowher.
Maybe Johnny Majors.
Tanner. No,
I wouldn't put Tanner.
Danny Murtaugh.
Yeah, probably Danny Murtaugh.
I mean, Murtaugh won 2 World Series.
Yeah, so that's 4.
Yeah,
it'd be tough. See what I'm saying? I really think I'd put him in top 5. I really do. And he had a really big personality.
Well, Fred Clark is still the all-time winningest Pirates coach. So, and he won I think he was the coach of the 1925 World Series Pirates.
Well, you can't match
Fred
1925.
Clark. Fred Clark was.
Yeah. but Leyland was like this really big personality, and you kind of alluded to this, Steve. He could be like very fiery. Like he would be out there screaming in the face of the umpire. He could also be like very cranky. He would give these post game interviews. He would do post game interviews from a rocking chair.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
He would sit in a
yeah.
rocking chair in the locker room, smoking a cigarette.
And he was 40, but he looked like he was 60.
He looked like he was 80.
Yeah.
He would just sit there in his rocking chair, and sometimes he could just be like, Jim, what did you think about tonight's game? I don't know what the hell happened. Right? He would just mumble his way through smoking a cigarette. He could be like emotional. It was not uncommon to see him cry. And then he could be really funny. There's all these clips of him with like a microphone, like crooning in the locker room.
I remember, after they won the pennant one year, he was like singing in the locker room.
Yeah. So he's just a big personality. I think he was really great at extracting the most out of his players, and they loved him. And he was a good leader. He was just a really good leader. It was exactly what the Pirates needed at that time to turn things around. They also have a general manager who we mentioned earlier named Sid Thrift, and he's making some really good moves. He acquires Bobby Bonilla from the White Sox and Doug Drabeck from the Yankees. These are two players who are young and who Thrift sees as really potential. Both of them have a lot of potential, and he makes deals to get both of them, and it works out really well in the end.
And it leads to a great Seinfeld reference when they George complains about trading Drabeck, the Steinbrenner.
Right. That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, because they dumped Doug Drabeck.
Yeah.
Speaking of trades, the most talked about trade for sure during the Sid Thrift era, and Steve, you alluded to this one earlier too, occurs on April 1st, 1987. And when I was looking up the research on this, I didn't have to look up the date of this. I remember the date.
April Fool's Day.
Because, yes, everyone thought it was an April Fool's joke. And I still remember that. I remember when people heard it, they're like, no, that didn't happen. That's an April Fool's joke. So what happens is the Pirates trade their starting catcher, six-time All-Star and best player, Tony Pena, to the St. Louis Cardinals for three guys that nobody had ever heard of, Andy Van Slyke, Mike LaValliere, and Mike Dunn. And people in Pittsburgh were just like outraged.
Yeah, I remember people were mad about that.
I remember my dad was like, I'm done. and I felt the same way. Like I used to emulate, Tony Pena had he didn't squat behind home plate.
No, he would sit on his knees or
Yeah.
like he would have his one leg out.
He'd have his one leg out. I used to
yeah.
emulate that. I used to catch, and I would emulate Tony Pena.
He could still pick people off of first from that.
He could.
He had a heck of an arm.
He did.
Yeah.
And I love Tony Pena, and he was the only player on the team that was even worth rooting for. And then they traded him? Are you kidding me? So a lot of people were really angry about that, but Thrift really makes the right call there. Pena's on the downside of his career. The Cardinals are in win-now mode. They'd been to the World Series in '85. They would go to the World Series again in '87. They had a really good team. They wanted a veteran catcher that they could count on. And the Pirates said, that guy's not going to be that good that much longer, and he wasn't. And they get Van Slyke and LaValliere.
Well, I mean, Mike Dunn became a cornerstone of the organization for 20 years. Remember Mike Dunn's Hall of Fame career?
No. I think that's
Maybe that was an alternate universe there.
Mike Dunn actually had a decent first season. And again, going back to baseball cards, he had the little Topps used to make these rookie cards with the little trophies on them to signify that they were a really good rookie. And Mike Dunn had a little Topps trophy on his
Was that
card.
the year with the wood? It had a little wood frame.
87 was the wood frame year.
Yeah.
Yep. See, I'm telling you, you remember too. You remember baseball cards. But Van Slyke and LaValliere both become key cogs, and Van Slyke, I would say, probably goes down as one of the most beloved Pirates players ever. So that was a big deal. But probably the most significant personnel move during this era was the drafting of a player named Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds was a very good player at Arizona State University. He's also baseball royalty. His father is former Major League All-Star Bobby Bonds. His godfather is the legendary Willie Mays. Bonds is poised to be an excellent player. He's also a very complicated human being. I mean, to say it gently. I think if you ever want to see a really good psychoanalysis of Barry Bonds and who he was as a person, I'd recommend go watch the Ken Burns baseball documentary. They talk a lot about him in one of those episodes, and they talk about how his father and his godfather really ingrained in him to have a chip on his shoulder, like the whole world's against you all the time. And I mean, I'm not sure, I mean, Willie Mays certainly, he started his career in the Negro Leagues when you weren't even allowed to play in Major League Baseball if you were African American. So
people really were against Willie Mays.
right,
Yeah.
right. And I'm not saying, racism was gone by 1986 or that, or that Barry Bonds might not have had some struggles, but it was definitely a different, I'm not sure what it was, but Bonds makes a lot of enemies. And, Steve, I was thinking about this. If you took every sport and you took the top 10 all time in every sport, not just team sports like baseball, football, hockey, but like tennis, golf, heck, auto racing, just take the top 10 of every one of those sports. Is there anybody in that list, and I'd put Barry Bonds in the top 10 in baseball, is there anybody in that list who's more universally despised than Barry Bonds?
Ty Cobb.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I mean, if you put him in your top 10, yes. I mean, but can you think of anybody else in any other sport? I can't.
Universally hated.
Universally just hated. I mean, teammates, fans, media.
That's a good question. I can't think of anybody like that in like professional football per se. Like, I don't know. Like, I can't even think of like somebody like, because like even like a guy like Rodney Harrison, who we might like people in New England love him,
Well, and he's not top 10 all time. Like,
right.
You know what I mean?
Like,
There's
he's
lots
not
of
a
guys.
great player. Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of guys you could say who are despised, but like
Bill Romanowski.
Right, but like on the level of a
Tom Brady or
Yeah, he's not really universally despised. A lot of people just don't like him. I mean, Barry Bonds, people just hate, and again, like
even the
teammates,
Giants fans,
even teammates and other ball players. So yeah, Barry Bonds. We'll definitely be talking about him a lot during this episode. But drafting him is really one of the biggest. Definitely leads to a lot of success later. One player they do not get during this time is Ken Griffey Jr. So this is an interesting factoid that I think a lot of people forget about. The Pirates had the worst record in baseball in 1986, which should mean that they get the first draft pick in 1987. But Major League Baseball at this time still treated the two leagues as separate leagues and separate entities. So the rule was that the American League team with the worst record would pick first in odd-numbered years, and the National League team with the worst record would pick first in even-numbered years. Now, that rule doesn't exist anymore, but it did back then. And so the Mariners in 1986 are 67 and 95, which is better than the Pirates' 64 and 98 mark. But because the Mariners play in the American League, they get to select first in the 87 draft. They get Ken Griffey Jr. The Pirates end up selecting Mark Merchant, who never plays a game in the majors.
Him and Mike Dunn are hanging out.
Yeah. Yes. So that kind of stunk. I mean, the Pirates.
They could have had Griffey and Bonds and not had to give up too much. Huh? Another Seinfeld reference.
Well, that would have been that would have been their first. They would have had Griffey instead of Mark.
That was one of George Costanza's trade ideas. So that's pretty impressive. The Pirates actually could have actually pulled off a Costanza there.
They would have had Griffey instead of Mark Merchant. That's literally was the trade.
And they played different positions too. So that would Griffey played center, didn't he, early in his career?
Yeah, I mean they would have put him in the outfield, and they probably would have never moved Bonilla from third base. So they would have found. Well,
yipes.
Yeah, yipes, right? But
so their batting order would have been, I don't know, whoever bats first for them back then. Darnell Coles, I don't know. And then okay, so let's wind it up with Bonilla, Bonds, and Griffey.
Yeah, and Van Slyke.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You got to bat Van Slyke fifth.
Really? Seriously? So
Sucks to be him.
Yeah, I mean,
he's going to see a lot of good pitches though.
Imagine the what ifs.
Do you throw a strike in the first half of the first 2 innings of a game?
Yep. But it doesn't happen. However, the Pirates still are building a pretty good team. You mentioned the turnaround in 1987, and by 1988 they're in position to make a pennant run. That's a really exciting season. They ultimately finish in second place to the Mets that year. They lose there's a really key game that year that they lose at Shea Stadium where they have 2 out. They're down. They have the Mets down to their last out, and Howard Johnson hits a home run off of Jim Gott and then that
I
kind
love
of
Jim Gott. That was one of, the reliever. Yeah.
yep, and that was kind of their that was like their best chance to catch the Mets, and they blew
And that was
it.
in '88, right?
That was '88.
Yeah, because well, we have that great story about the Mayors too.
Yes.
'cause, like,
So
Yeah.
Steve, tell that story about the Mayors. That
and I
year.
remember this from when I was a kid because I remember like hating New York after this. Maybe that's why I've never gone to New York City. I don't know because of Ed Koch. But so I'm like, I guess the Pirates thought they would have some fun with New York, and they ran a local commercial. And the local commercial was, what does it say? It said, what do you hate? Like things that they hate about like New York. It was like cabbies that don't speak English, like smelly city, traffic jams, cab drivers who don't speak English, obnoxious people. And it was like a Pirates ad for tickets or whatever. And it was like, and then it showed like a Mets logo and said just another thing they hate about New York. And the Mets were like, I think they won the series in '86, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they were still like a really good team. They still had Doc Gooden, Darryl Strawberry, yeah. And so after that, somebody asked Ed Koch, who was the mayor of the city back then, like what his opinions of that was, and he said like Pittsburgh, where's Pittsburgh, or who's Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh who, or something like that. I think he said Pittsburgh who. And so this leads to a big thing, and Mayor Caligiuri had died by that time, and it was a mayor by the name of Sophie Maslow. And then Sophie said that the New York sounds like Big applesauce in her own, like you got a Pittsburgh, like Sophie had a very Pittsburgh accent from like if she was like your grandmother from like Squirrel Hill, you know, like
Yes.
big applesauce.
Yes,
And it led to
actually a
this
very
whole
good
like trash,
impersonation.
like this whole trash talk. Like she sent a map to Ed Koch, and Ed Koch was like, "Yeah, you need a map to get around Pittsburgh," and like it was like some serious trash
Wow.
talk for like July 1st, 1988. It was all in good humor, but I mean it was pretty funny. And I just remember that was like a big thing to like, you know, whatever my 11 or 12-year-old self, like, oh, those New Yorkers. Like it kind of like I don't think Pittsburgh's ever had that big of a rivalry with New York, more with Boston than New York, but
Yeah.
definitely fanned the flames and was just like it's just weird that like Ed Koch took time out of his day to like talk trash on. I guess after that commercial, I guess, and it was on WWOR too, like because like back then WWOR was still like a New York channel, because like I remember watching Kiner's Corners after like if the Mets played the Pirates, you could watch like, or the Mets just play, you could watch Kiner's Corner and watch Ralph Kiner talk about the Mets, but it was just it was a different time, and WWOR was like that was a wild like little station. It was the New York local
Right.
New York station, but you got it in Pittsburgh because of cable finally.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
Yeah. So I mean, imagine if that happened today. I guess it would all be on Twitter now or Facebook.
I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure they'd be tagging each other. And
Yeah.
It
It would be like blown out of proportion too. Like everybody would get all mad at each other. Like, oh, how dare you? Like, how dare Mayor de Blasio, Mayor Peduto talk trash on each other? You know.
I do remember hating the Mets and the Phillies a lot during this time. Those were the two teams that I just did not like.
And that was the infamous 10-run game too against the Phillies.
I think that was the year after. I think
Yeah,
that was
they were-
'89, where they came back from 10 runs down.
And Jim Rooker had to walk home.
Jim Rooker had to walk home because he said he would walk home if the Pirates blew it, and then the Pirates blew it.
It is 200 and some miles from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh, by the way. He
And
did
he-
it for like charity.
He did, yeah.
In the
He
off
actually-
season.
He
Yeah.
actually walked home. They don't win the division, but it's a good year. Leland is actually named the co-manager of the year that year with Tommy Lasorda. But after that season, Thrift is fired, and it's not because he's doing a bad job. He's doing a great job, just because he's butting heads with management. And you know, I don't remember this, and I don't remember how much was made about it in the media. So I just kind of had to go from, you know, old news stories and stuff. But, you know, from what I can glean, I mean, Thrift seems like a guy who's very good at his job, knows he's very good at his job, and doesn't think he has to answer to anybody. There's a big story from back then where he trades Darnell Coles, and he doesn't get like any like okay from management. He just kind of makes his own moves. He doesn't He doesn't think anybody needs to sign off on any of the deals he makes. And eventually that just leads to him getting fired. So that seems like it maybe should sink the Pirates, but Larry Doty is his replacement, and the Pirates really don't miss a beat.
I remember storing a paper, somebody getting kicked out of Three River Stadium because they brought a sign in that said "Bring back Sid," and it wasn't Sid Bream, it was Sid Thrift.
Sid Thrift, yeah. Yeah.
And the Pirates weren't putting up with that, I guess.
How dare you question our management? They continue to build a winner, and by 1990, it finally all comes together for a postseason berth. That year, the Pirates are again in a race with the Mets for the NL East division. Goes all the way down to the last month of the season, but this time the Pirates are the better team. And by this point, the real strength of the Pirates is the middle of their order, which is Van Slyke in center field batting third, Bonilla in right field batting fourth, and then Bonds in left field batting fifth. Bonds becomes the first major leaguer in history to have a 300 batting average, 100 RBI, 100 runs, and 50 stolen bases all in the same season. Just for good measure, he also hits 33 home runs.
Back then, that was impressive.
And that was a lot. That was pre-steroids.
Yeah, because like 15 to 20 was a good year.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. He's named the National League MVP. Drabek has his big career breakout year. He wins 22 games, and he's named the National League Cy Young Award winner. So the Pirates have the MVP and Cy Young Award winner. Couple of highlights from that season. On June 24th, there's a game at Montreal where Stan Belinda comes into the game to replace Bob Kipper in the bottom of the ninth inning with the bases loaded and no outs. And Belinda retires 3 batters without allowing a run to win the game. So Stan Belinda at this point is a relief pitcher. He throws like this really hard sidearm fastball, and I think he's in his second year, so he's still kind of like, you're not sure what his place is. This is really his breakout game, and really for the next 3 years, he slowly works his way to the point where Leland eventually trusts him to close out games. And I wanted to mention this game because we'll talk more about Belinda later.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about another scenario where he came in the bottom of the ninth with bases loaded and no outs. On August 3rd, Drabek comes within 1 out of throwing a no-hitter against Philadelphia. So Steve, I talked about how much I love baseball. Like, as I was looking back on some of these games, I can remember where I was for some of these games. That August 3rd, 1990 game where Drabek almost had the no-hitter, my brother and I were playing in our backyard, and my dad comes out and he's like, "Hey, Drabek has a no-hitter going through like 6 innings." And we like ran inside and we're like glued to the TV. We're like, "Oh my gosh, we might get to see a no-hitter," because they were rare back then. It's still rare today, I guess. But and then it got all the way down to the final out, and the guy that broke it up was a guy for Philadelphia named Sil Campusano.
Wow. Geez.
Well, if you ever needed the answer to that trivia question, ask my brother. He'll never forget that guy's name. He was so angry that this bum Sil Campusano broke up the no-hitter.
Did he bunt or something? Or?
No, he just got a single. He just
okay.
like slapped a single to left field or something. So that was a bummer, but Drabek still won the game and obviously had a stellar season. And then there's a series early in September with the Mets that's essentially going to decide the division, and that was huge. Like I remember
that.
Yeah, I remember Bonilla was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and I want to say the headline was like "Down to the Wire" on like the cover of Sports Illustrated, and the Pirates sweep the series. And back then, there's only 2 divisions.
Right, it's an East and a West.
There's an East and a West. There's no wild cards, so you go straight
right to the championship.
Yeah,
series,
you go straight to the NLCS, the 2 division winners. There's no division series. There's no wild card game. There's no play-in wild card game. There's none of that. So you really had to be like the best of the best to get into the playoffs. 1990 was like one of my favorite baseball seasons ever, just in general, not even just in Pittsburgh. There were I think there was like 9 no-hitters that year. It was pretty crazy. Rickey Henderson sets the stolen base record. Willie McGee wins the National League batting title that year, playing in the American League, which was really goofy. He'd been traded to Oakland like late in the season, but his stats still counted for the National League. Bo Jackson was huge at this time. He was a 2-sport star, and Again, talking about baseball cards, he had this Score baseball card that year where it was like him with a baseball bat and shoulder pad,
Yeah, I
football
remember
shoulder
that.
pads.
Yeah.
And it was like a black and white photo. It was on the cover of Beckett Baseball Card Monthly. Like that was, man. Like I said, Steve, I love baseball so much. I remember so much during that time, and it was so cool to have the Pirates like being good in the middle of all that. Like I played one of the other things loving baseball. I used to love like Nintendo baseball games. Probably like a quarter of the games I owned or rented were baseball games. And like if you were playing like RBI Baseball 2, you would never pick the Pirates because they stunk. And it was cool to like get to a point where you could actually like pick the Pirates, or you wanted to trade for the Pirates baseball cards. Yeah, I remember too the Pittsburgh Press on the front page of the paper.
I remember this, yeah.
Yeah, for like weeks, they just had this big box up in the corner. It was Pirates magic number.
Yeah, and it started with like 19 or
Yeah.
something, like a high number too. It wasn't
Yeah.
like 5 or 6.
Right.
No, it was like in August.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just kept counting down, and then until finally the Pirates clinched. So super exciting. And the other thing that was fun from that season, there was this like super it's very dated now song that came out that year. It was called "You Gotta Believe." It was
It's mullet-tastic.
it is mullet-tastic, and it was just it was they would play it like before the game or after the games, I think, and they would play it at the stadium. They would play it on the radio, and it was kind of became the anthem for the Pirates during that time. You Gotta Believe. So that was just a lot of fun. The Pirates are finally good. The Pirates are also in like big win now mode. They trade away. They make a trade late in the season where they trade away future 6-time All-Star Moises Alou for a pitcher named Zane Smith. We talked about Zane Smith in our B team episode, and the Pirates. Moises Alou was this really good prospect, and I think a lot of people knew he was going to be really good, and he was. He was a great player, for sure. But Moises Alou was not going to help the Pirates win in 1990 or 91 or 92. But Zane Smith did. Like, they needed a pitcher. They needed somebody to fill that void in the rotation. And Zane
It's probably
Smith,
one of the few trades that worked out well for both
it
parties.
did. Yeah, it really did, because
Where'd he go, Montreal?
he went to Montreal, and later Chicago. And again, was a very great player. But again, the Pirates were in win now mode. And it's just funny to kind of look back on that. There was a time when the Pirates were the team, trading their prospects for somebody that could help them win now. You might never see that again. So the Pirates make it to the NLCS, where they run into just a powerhouse Cincinnati Reds team. The Reds that year went wire to wire, which meant they were in first place from day one of the season, and they never relinquished it. They eventually would sweep the Oakland Athletics in the World Series, which is
I think the
shocking.
Pirates series went more like 5 games.
Yeah, 6 games.
Six
The Pirates,
games. It did go 6 games.
The Pirates do put up a little bit of a fight. I mean, but the Reds are clearly the better team.
Well, that's that weird. I think they showed that part of that one game. They picked the guy off at like second at the end of the game. And the highlight of that game was Marge Schott smoking in the stands at Riverfront Stadium. Like literally first row.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, it's Marge Schott.
Yeah, he was
Things that would not happen today for 100, Alex.
Yeah, he was a very flamboyant.
The owner sitting, not only the owner sitting in the front row, the owner sitting in the front row while smoking like a Marlboro.
She had that dog too. Remember that dog she named after? I think her dog's name was like Shotzi.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was a character. I mean, but yeah, when they swept Oakland, I mean, Oakland was the 3-time defending AL champions. They had like Jose Canseco,
And Mark
McGwire,
McGwire,
and Dave Stewart, and Dennis Eckersley. Like, they were a powerhouse team, and Cincinnati swept them in the World Series. So yeah, the Pirates just aren't up to the task. They're also kind of like the new blood team. They're just sort of getting their feet wet in success. So it's disappointing, but there's a lot of hope for the future after that season. I'm not going to go real in detail about that NLCS, but I do want to make one note that happened during that series was that the star players really do not produce, and that's unfortunately the start of a trend. Yeah. So now we head into the 1990 offseason, and so there was one big story that happened in that offseason. The Pirates in 1990, their starting first baseman was a player named Sid Bream. Sid Bream had been with the Pirates since the lean years, and he has a very solid bounce back season in 1990. He had missed most of 1989 with an injury, and he actually wins the Hutch Award, which is an award they give in Major League Baseball for like persevering through adversity. So he's a pretty good little season, and after the season, he's a free agent. And Pirates management comes out and publicly states in the media that re-signing Bream is, quote, their number one priority for the 1990 offseason. Bream badly wants to stay too. He's from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and when he was traded from the Dodgers to the Pirates back in 1985, he called it, quote, a dream come true. So it just seems like, hey, this should be pretty easy to make happen. Things go south. And I have a personal story from back then. So that fall, I was coming out of school one day, probably like November. It was after the season had ended, and this was going on. And my mom was picking me up from school, and I went out to meet her at in the parking lot, and she wasn't in her car. And I look around, and I see that she's over at this other car talking to this man in this other car. And I can see that the man she's talking to is crying, like very emotionally, like tears streaming down his face, crying. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I just kind of wait, until she's done, because I don't want to walk over there and, awkwardly be like, hey, what's up? So she comes back, and I said, Mom, what's going on? Like, who's that guy? Why is he so upset? And my mom said, oh, that's Sid Bream. And Sid Bream's son went to our school. Yeah, Steve and I went to the same school. Sid Bream's son went to our school, and he was there to pick up his son. And I said, well, why is he crying? And she said, well, because he just found out that he's not going to be back in Pittsburgh playing for the Pirates. And what had happened was that the Pirates, they only offered Bream a fraction of fair market price, and the Atlanta Braves came in and actually made him a much bigger offer. And even with the bad offer, Bream and his wife, they say that they stayed up all night thinking about this, and they decide, you know what, money's not everything. Like, we really love it here. We want to stay here. Let's just take the bad offer from the Pirates, because that's how badly they wanted to stay in Pittsburgh. And the only thing that Bream asked for is a no trade clause in his contract, because he doesn't want to take a bad offer to stay.
And then not get the money and then get traded anyway.
Yeah, and then in spring training, they're like, ooh, we can get prospects for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Pirates won't even do that for him, which makes it pretty obvious that, really the only reason they want to bring him back is for low money so they can use him as a bargaining chip in a trade. And from the Pirates' perspective, they have Gary Redus ready to take over the position at first base. Bream's knees were shot. He had multiple surgeries. He's on the back end of his career. It's a business, blah, blah, blah. But then why did you come out and say that re-signing him is your number one priority?
That might have been a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you basically just lied to the fan, because Bream was very popular. And I think they just did that to lie to the fans. And then they could make it look like, oh, well, we tried to re-sign him, but, somebody else offered him more money. And you're
just better off not saying anything.
Yeah. Or if you think he's done and he has all these knee surgeries, then just say, hey, man, thanks for everything. We wish you the best of luck elsewhere.
Or just come on and say, well, here's our offer. We're not going to offer you no trade. We might trade you in the middle of the season. Here's the offer.
Yeah.
Go out and see what else. You could have just been honest. Like, this is our offer. This is our plans. If you want to go somewhere else and get a better offer with then go for it. God bless you.
Exactly. Yeah. That would have been the classy and right way to handle it.
Well, it's just at least be honest.
Yes, but that's not.
I mean, there's no real advantage to being dishonest there.
Right. Well, and yeah, they did him wrong there, and it's and it comes back to haunt them. Like nothing has ever come back to haunt the team, probably ever. So now the 1991 season begins, and honestly, when the 91 season begins, that's the Bream thing's almost an afterthought, because the Pirates have an excellent team in 91. Van Slyke later says that it's the most talented team he's ever played on. I'd take it a step further, Steve. I'd say this is the 91 team, in my opinion, is the best team that they've had since the 79 World Series team. I mean, and I know there's not a lot to pick from in the last 40 years. You're probably only 5 or 6 teams you could even pick from.
The one with Garrett Cole that won the wild card game?
That was pretty good.
Well, they were wild card though still, but
Yeah, I mean that was a good team. The team that won 98 games in 2015 was pretty good, and then the other two teams from this era. But that team was just so loaded with talent, like the players that they had on that team. Bonds continues to be the best player in baseball. He's robbed of a second consecutive MVP award, in my opinion. If you go back and look at the stats that year, he's the best player in baseball. But I think, it's a award that's voted on. And when people don't like you, they're not going to vote for you.
Who did win the MVP in '91?
It's Terry Pendleton
Okay.
of the Braves, and we'll talk about the Braves later because they obviously play into the season. But again, if you look at statistics and everything else, I mean, I thought Bonds was the runaway MVP that year. But again, people don't like Bonds already by this point. Bonilla and Jay Bell finish in the top 12 for National League MVP voting. Orlando Merced, actually, we mentioned Gary Redus was like the future at first base. Well, Orlando Merced's a rookie, and he eventually supplants Redus as the first baseman. He finishes second in the National League Rookie of the Year voting. So they have these really good offensive players, and then they have three pitchers who win 15-plus games. Zane Smith, Doug Drabeck, and then John Smiley. Smiley had always been like a solid pitcher for the Pirates, but this is really his career year. He wins 20 games, and he finishes third in the National League Cy Young voting. So it's just an absolute stacked lineup. They win 98 games. That's the best record in all of Major League Baseball. They become the first National League team in 13 years to repeat as a division champion. So that was a big deal. Like, it was not easy to repeat. And they were the first team in 13 years to do it. And they set an attendance record at Three Rivers Stadium, which is such a comeback from where they were in the mid-'80s.
Well,
right?
It was tough to always fill that. They always had trouble. Like at 50,000 fans, that was probably a little bit big for baseball.
Yes.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, but that year a lot of people came out to see them. So some highlights from that season. It kind of starts off rocky. Bonds and Leland get into a shouting match in spring training. And Steve, you've probably seen that clip before.
Yeah.
It's been showed 100 times. It was showed 1,000 times back then. And I'd love to see like the raw clip of it, because every time I've seen it, you can't understand. Every other word is bleeped.
Yeah.
So you can't even understand what they're saying, but they're pretty animated, shouting at each other. And I think even at this point, I think people are starting to realize like Barry Bonds is not a likable person, even though he's a great player. April 21st, 1991, there's a game against the Cubs that still to this day probably has to go down as one of the all-time great Pirates games. They trail the Cubs by 5 runs, but they come all the way back to tie the game and send it into extra innings. In the top of the 11th inning, the Cubs again go up by 5 runs, mostly due to an Andre Dawson grand slam. The
Hawk.
I always hated Andre Dawson, and I was looking back on this game.
Was he the one that always slid head first?
No, that was Tim Raines.
That was Tim Raines. Okay,
Yeah. Andre Dawson did not have a cocaine problem, as far as I know. But I was like, why did I hate Andre Dawson? Like, what did he ever do? And I really think it was just because I think he used to always kill the Pirates.
I do remember him being like good. Yes.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Hawk.
Yeah. And so
And what did the Cubs ever win back then? They were
Not a
never-
lot.
Yeah.
And they had some really talented teams too. But Andre Dawson hits a grand slam. The Cubs again go up by 5, and then in the bottom of the 11th, the Pirates again come all the way back from 5 runs down. This time all in the same inning, and this time they score 6 runs. They win the game. So that was just unbelievable to be down by 5 twice, to come back from down by 5 twice, and to win the game. And again, going back to like I remember where I was. This one I remember we were coming back from out of town. We were in the car. And we were listening to like the AM radio broadcast.
Geez. Nice.
We were
Lanny Fateri in all his glory.
Yeah, Lanny and Steve Blass and Jim Rooker and those guys. And it was like crackling because we weren't like in Pittsburgh yet. We were driving towards Pittsburgh, but I remember listening to that game on the radio on the way back from a trip. May 10th of that year, the Braves come to Three Rivers Stadium, and it's Sid Bream's first game back in Pittsburgh, but he's on the bench because of the pitching matchup. And the Pirates win this game pretty easily. They're out to a big lead in the 9th inning. And so the Braves send out Bream to pinch hit, and the fans give him a huge ovation, and they start chanting his name. And Bream responds by driving a ball to deep center field for a home run. and everybody just goes crazy. I even remember Lanny Fratteri on the broadcast of this game going, "Gobo, get out of here!"
Wow.
Like it was
For
it
a
was,
Braves home run. Yeah.
yeah, for a Braves home run. The fans all demanded a curtain call. Like they wanted him to come out of the dugout and tip his cap, which he does. It's a super unique moment because I can't think of too many other times where, I know like when Marc-Andre Fleury came back, people gave him a big ovation, stuff like that. But like for a player doing something against a Pittsburgh team and everybody cheering. Now, granted, like again, it didn't impact the game. The Pirates were already going to win. But I mean, it was just pretty cool that everybody wanted him to hit that home run, and he did. And it just showed how much Bream was beloved in Pittsburgh. After this game, I pulled this from the newspaper article of this game. Barry Bonds has a very prophetic quote. He says, quote, "Sid Bream has always been an important part of this club. Me, if I left and came back, I'd get booed." End quote.
Well then, Barry. Let's not change your attitude at all. Keep doing the same thing you're doing.
Yep. August 12th, the Cardinals come to Three River Stadium. They're right behind the Pirates in the National League East standings, and they take a lead in the top of the 11th. In the bottom of the 11th, Bonilla gets on first. That brings up Bonds against Hall of Famer Lee Smith. Lee Smith, the Cardinals reliever, is in his absolute prime at this point. I mentioned that Smiley finished third in the Cy Young Award voting. Lee Smith finished second. So Lee Smith is very dominant that year. And probably his most iconic moment as a Pirate, Bonds crushes a 3-2 pitch to right field for the game-winning home run.
I remember that was on all the news and commercials, everything for a long time after that.
It's the one where as soon as he hits it, he sticks both arms.
Yeah, and you can see the crowd. Yeah,
he sticks both arms straight up into the air. Yeah, it's an iconic moment
because they have it the view is normally from the dugout. It's like the one you don't even see Lee Smith. You just see Bonds crush the ball. And
and then stick his arms up. Yep. Yeah, to me, that's the signature Barry Bonds Pirates moment, that home run. It was a big game because the Cardinals were right behind them in the standings. And Bonds was just an immensely talented player, and he was clutch as long as it wasn't, a playoff game. That team, the 91 team, it's also a fun team. The Pirates would hold these big around-the-world basketball tournaments in their clubhouse with the foam basketball and the little hoop, and there's they would do NCAA bracket style, eliminations, and they even at one point they get Marv Albert, the basketball announcer.
I remember watching this.
Yeah,
it's the season highlights of that year.
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Marv Albert narrates one of their around the world
tournaments.
Yes,
Bonds for 3. Yes.
Yep, and the one that Marv Albert does, I don't know who used to win these most often, but I know the one that Marv Albert does, the final 4 in the brackets is Bonds, Van Slyke, LaValliere, and Curtis Wilkerson, and Wilkerson's the guy that wins.
Mike LaValliere, boy, didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
Of all the people.
Well, I mean, it was foam basketball, so I'm not sure Spanky would have been, dunking on a court or anything.
Yeah.
He was not the tallest guy, and we'll actually talk about that. Actually factors into later as well. They also used to give out this award called the Sammy Award. It was named after Sammy Khalifa, who was the middling shortstop that played for the Pirates in the mid-'80s.
He was the shortstop of the future.
Yeah,
he's only one of the few Egyptian players to play in Major League Baseball.
Was he? That's a fun fact. So Sammy was gone by that point, but they had named the award after him, and the award was for a player who had done something stupid during a win. So I guess it would have been bad team chemistry to give out you did something stupid during a loss because then you're blaming somebody for the loss. So you could only give this award during a win. And some of the examples, Jim Leland got it one time because Bonilla had struck out and he was arguing balls and strikes with the umpire, and he kept looking over at the dugout for Leland to come out and argue with him. And Leland's actually in the bathroom.
Nice.
So he gets the Sammy Award for that. Jay Bell forgot his glove one time. He went out without a glove. So
he's going to play 19th century style shortstop too. Wasn't left field or something.
Yeah, he was a shortstop, so that wasn't good. So yeah, just it was a fun team. They were having fun. They were winning games, and it was other than Bonds, it was a likable team that was fun to root for. So they're going to go back to the playoffs as the Eastern Division winner. The other division winner in the National League is the Atlanta Braves. And this is just a huge surprise because if there's any team that was like worse than the Pirates,
It was the Braves.
yeah, in the 80s, it was the Atlanta Braves.
It was Dale Murphy and like 20 other guys.
Yes.
That was about it.
Yes, they're terrible. They were just a totally worthless franchise. And for
They
the
had Hank
previous,
Aaron for a little bit.
well, yeah, yeah. I mean, sure. But by this point in the 80s, again, just like the Pirates, they had become mostly irrelevant. They had lost close to 100 games for the previous 3 seasons. Their general manager is a guy named Bobby Cox. And just like the Pirates were doing, Bobby Cox is using these last place finishes to build for the future. He collects this, nice group of pretty good young players like David Justice and Ron Gant. And he figures that, the only piece that's really missing is that this team doesn't have a manager. So in 1990, he fires the manager and makes himself the manager. And by 1991, they're ready to start winning. And what really makes the Braves talented, I mentioned they had some good, hitters, but it's their pitching staff. They had a rotation of 4 dominant starting pitchers, and this is before they had Greg Maddux, by the way. They got Greg Maddux, I want to say, a year or 2 later. But there were 4 starting pitchers in '91 were Tom Glavine, who wins the Cy Young Award that year, Steve Avery, who's a 21-year-old kid who wins 18 games, Charlie Leibrandt, who's a veteran who also has a very solid year, and then like the quote-unquote like worst pitcher of that group is Hall of Famer John Smoltz. And I say worst because he only wins 14 games,
Yeah.
which on any other team would
I
be
remember
their ace.
Avery was really good. I remember Avery more than Smoltz for some reason.
Avery, the reason you remember that, I bet the reason you remember that is because the NLCS, and we'll get
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah.
We mentioned Pendleton being named the league MVP. He was a guy that had kind of like flamed out in St. Louis and really resurrected his career in Atlanta. And it was a great story. They were like worst to first. I mean, they came out of nowhere. Nobody saw that coming. The Atlanta Braves are now a powerhouse team and would be for the rest of the decade. So that's the matchup in the NLCS. And I want to dig into that 91 NLCS because, Steve, I don't know why, but I can remember very vividly it was a 7-game series. It went all 7 games. I can remember every game vividly, more so than 92. Game 1 starts off great. It's at 3 River Stadium. Van Slyke homers off Glavine in the first inning. The Pirates roll to an easy 5-0 victory. And I remember the feeling after that game was, wow, this is so different than the previous year, where it was obvious that the Pirates were like the newcomers, that they were overmatched by Cincinnati. And now they look like the veteran championship team, and the Braves look like the team that, like, maybe this is just their starting point. Maybe it's next year or future years for them. But then the momentum swings very quickly. Atlanta takes game 2 and a 1-0 victory. Steve, there's your guy, Steve Avery.
Yeah.
So he beats the Pirates 1-0 in game 2, and then the Braves back in Atlanta blow out the Pirates in game 3. So now the Braves are up 2-1 in the series, and the Pirates' bats are starting to go very cold, especially with that heart of the order outfield that we mentioned. Van Slyke goes 4 of 25 in the series, and 2 of those hits come in game 1.
Wow.
So we mentioned like the home run in game 1. So after game 1, he only gets 2 more hits in the rest of the series. Bonilla fares a little bit better, but he doesn't really make an impact. He has 1 RBI. That's also in game 1. And then Bonds goes 4 of 27 in the series, 0 home runs, 0 RBIs. That's a 7-game series in which the best player in baseball gets 4 hits and doesn't hit a home run. So that was just disastrous. The Pirates are bailed out in game 4 by like the non-star players. That game goes into the 10th inning, and the Pirates really need to win because they're going to go down 3-1. And Bonilla and Bonds are the first 2 batters in that inning, and they both get out. But then Steve Buechele and Mike LaValliere at the bottom of the order get the Pirates the go-ahead run. I want to say Jose Lean made a big play earlier in that game too. So you have like the Jose Leans and Mike LaVallieres and Steve Buechele's are the ones making the big hits, and you have Van Slyke, Bonilla, and Bonds doing nothing. That sets up. So that was a big win. That sets up a pivotal game 5 in Atlanta. The series is tied 2-2. And again, the Pirates aren't able to generate a lot of offense. They only score 1 run against Glavine. But Zane Smith is pitching for the Pirates. He pitches a masterpiece. And the Braves are also only able to muster one run. However, the Braves have their one run disqualified when David Justice misses third base. So David Justice is rounding third base on his way to home.
Yeah.
And he's like stumbles and he tries to drag his foot over the base. The umps say, nope, you never touched it, and he's out. And the Pirates win 1-0 on that. Really,
Did they appeal? I guess the Pirates appealed that.
I mean, there was no instant replay then.
Well, I mean, they have to throw over and all that.
Oh yeah, they had
Yeah.
like they threw the ball to third base, and then the ump said you're out.
Yeah.
Right, and people in Atlanta were furious. So it was sort of a controversial game, but it puts the Pirates up 3-2. So even though the Pirates have struggled in the hitting department against these good Atlanta pitchers, they come back to Pittsburgh for Game 6 and 7, needing to just win one of those two games to earn a trip to the World Series. And that Game 5 in Atlanta, we talked about this too in our 80s Steelers episode. That Game 5 in Atlanta was on a Monday afternoon. And that night, the Steelers are playing the Giants on Monday Night Football at the River Stadium. And the Giants go up like 20-0 in the first half. And everybody at the Steelers game starts chanting, let's go Bucs, let's go Bucs. Because, like, who cares? The Steelers stunk that year. It's like, who cares about the Steelers? We're going to go to the World Series. Go Bucs. And that was almost a surreal scene. I wish I would have had that, like a video camera of that, because talk about stuff you're likely to never again see in your entire life. People, chanting "Let's go Bucs" at a Steeler game. So again, everybody's really excited. Avery's on the mound again for Game 6, and again, Avery wins 1-0. I mean, he was 21 years old, and for him to win 2 games in that series 1-0, I mean, that was pretty clutch. And then Smiley is the ace that year. He's on the mound in Game 7, but he gets totally rocked in that game. He actually doesn't even make it out of the first inning. And the Braves roll 4-0, and they end the Pirates season. And it really stunk. I mean, the Pirates had such a good team that year. And then they had 2 games at home to win the pennant, and they failed to score a run in either game. Like, they got shut out at home for Game 6 and 7. That was just super disappointing. That would have set up a Pittsburgh versus Minnesota World Series, which would have been so cool because those two cities had played each other a few months earlier for the Stanley Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so it would have been like Pittsburgh versus Minnesota Part 2. And the Twins were really good that year. That could have been a heck of a series, but it doesn't happen. After that season, Bonilla is a free agent, and he leaves to go sign with the New York Mets, which is a deal that worked out really, really badly for the New York Mets, who are still paying him to this day.
Well, but he's got to get paid.
Bonds and Drabek are also on their final year of their contracts. So, Bonilla is already gone. Bonds and Drabek, you don't know what's going to happen with them. And then the Pirates really shock everyone by trading Smiley to the Twins right before the 92 season starts. And, so again, Steve, you alluded to this earlier. The economics, you talked about the economics of going to the games. The economics of like managing teams at this point was a mess. You just had teams like the Pirates. It was really difficult for them to compete. They had lost $7 million in 1991 despite having that attendance record. And the economics were really uneven. And they're still uneven today. And baseball doesn't have a salary cap. But they did implement revenue sharing and some other measures that would at least help teams like this have some kind of a chance.
Well, I don't think TV contracts were quite where like cable was still like New Kid on the Block, and they hadn't, ESPN hadn't become what it would, and even the regional AT&T or whatever, what was it, KBL back then, they would show Pirate games, but it wasn't like it is now where every Pirate game is on, and that's worth a lot of money to the team. So that was a revenue stream they weren't, wasn't available to that team at that point.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we as fans all saw that coming. I mean, Bonilla left and you thought, boy, they're probably going to lose Drabek and Bonds. I think when they traded Smiley before the 92 season, because I think everybody thought, okay, 92 is going to be that one last run.
Yeah.
But then they trade Smiley before the season starts, and it's like, wait, are they giving up already? Like, are they basically saying the window's closed? That was shocking and they traded him for prospects. for Denny Nagel and Midre Cummings. Like, so and the Twins were the defending World Series champions. So it was like, I mean, that's the kind of trade you would make in July when you're out of it. It's not the trade you would make in spring training with your pitcher that had won 20 games. So that was pretty shocking. If you ever watch This Is Us, they do a whole episode where young Kevin Pearson, in the John Smiley trade. So yeah, that's the way the '92 season kind of starts. And again, we talked about Van Slyke said '91 was the most talented team he played on, but he also says that '92 was like the best team he ever played on. And like, I feel like you see that a lot in sports where one year a team might have more talent, but then another year is when they like put it all together to win.
It's just the chemistry's better, or
Right.
like the players complement each other a little better. Like their weaknesses and strengths fit together, you know? It's kind of like I think I like that Steelers they had with Le'Veon Bell, Brown, and Roethlisberger. Like that team won nothing.
Right.
And big part of it is you had two schmucks on your team, so.
Right. Well, and sometimes like I was just trying to think of recent teams. The Tampa Bay Lightning set the NHL record for wins in a season in 2019.
And then got swept, yeah.
Yeah, and they didn't win anything. But then the year after that, when they weren't as good as they were that year before, they won it all. So you mentioned the Steelers, and remember they were 15-1 in 2004, but then they won the Super Bowl in 2005. Yeah. Again, you just that happens sometimes, and that was kind of what Van Slyke said about that '92 team. Here's a great trivia question, Steve. So Bonilla's gone. Who's the opening day starter in right field for the Pirates to replace Bonilla?
I don't know, actually.
Kirk Gibson.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they had yeah.
Kirk. I can't believe what I just saw. Hero of the 1988 World Series.
Well, I remember they had Glenn Wilson too. That I always loved. That was like in the 80s.
Yeah, so
because Glenn Wilson pulled a Kirk Gibson before Kirk Gibson. Like it was in the middle of the season. He like waddled off the bench and like I'm hurt. I can't run. Well, you got to hit a home run. That's the only thing you can do. Because that's what Kirk Gibson did. Right. If he didn't hit a home run, he was going to be out or like walking the first very slowly.
Yeah, that was his only at bat of that series.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kirk Gibson. Everybody knows who he is because he hit one of the most famous home runs in baseball history. And he's the opening day starter. He did not last very long. I think the Pirates.
I mean, I thought him as a wide receiver from Michigan State, but
I think the Pirates signed him as like maybe he's got something left in the tank, and then it was pretty clear he wasn't. I think he was waived by like May of that season, so he wasn't there very long. But I think that's a great trivia question that he was actually the opening day starter in right field.
He was out there the whole time going, yeah.
And Jack Buck was going, I can't believe what I just saw. Drabek wins 15 games that year. He has a really good season again. He posted 2.77 ERA. Randy Tomlin's a guy we haven't mentioned yet. He was also a really solid pitcher during that time for the Pirates. He kind of steps up to fill the void left by Smiley. He wins 14 games that year. That's a big year for him. Steve, I think you knew him, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to the same church. We sat in the same pew. Him and who's the other guy? He pitched for the Mets. The guy was the second spitter in Seinfeld. Roger McDowell.
Oh, Roger McDowell. Okay.
Yeah, Roger McDowell went to our church too.
Okay.
Because I think McDowell was with the Pirates for a minute somewhere in there.
Okay.
But Tomlin was like that lefty, crafty kind of lefty. I remember his first game, he had a really good outing. He like pitched a no-hitter or something, or a one-run game into the 7th or 8th or something. Like his first game out.
Yeah.
He didn't have a very long career though.
No, but he was, again, during this time, just like Zane Smith and these other guys, he really was a key contributor. By this point, Belinda has become the main closer. Bill Landrum had led the team in saves in 90 and 91, but he's gone by this point, and now Belinda is firmly the guy that Leland trusts to come in and close out the game.
They never really had a closer. Like that was probably like their pitching was always weak on these teams. Outside of like Drabek or like Smiley, but like they never really had like that lockdown like closer guy. Like Jim Gott, like I said, I like Jim Gott, but I remember him like opening the one season, like he walked in the winning run and then he like never really was a closer again for the Pirates.
So what was your take on Belinda? Because I know for me, I mean,
I didn't really have. I just remember like I like Jim Gott, and I never thought Bill Landrum was all that great. I thought Bill Landrum was kind of mediocre, but like I mean, he was just like they never really had a bullpen. Like it was always like I said, they Roger McDowell and I mean, yeah, nothing against the guy that I went to church with, but he was kind of over the hill by that point, probably.
yeah, I mean, Belinda used to always make me nervous. Like when he would come into the game, I never felt comfortable.
Call it the Mike Tomczak kind of feeling. Yeah,
and he wasn't bad. It wasn't like he was bad. Again, I think Mike Tomczak's a great comparison because Mike Tomczak could have these really great games. He could win you games, but then he could like blow it too.
Yeah.
And
normally in spectacular fashion.
Right.
Yeah.
And I felt like Belinda was the same way. And he was certainly not, we mentioned Lee Smith earlier, or Dennis Eckersley, or Trevor Hoffman.
No, they never had that guy. I think
No.
that was one of the most glaring weaknesses of that era was they never had that guy. They were built more on hitting, and they always say, pitching wins.
Oh, well, and like I said, Landrum led the team in saves, but he was not like if you look at the stats, he didn't have like 40 saves and the next guy had like 2.
No, it was pretty spread out.
It was spread out, right? Yeah. So he wasn't even the closer. So Belinda, by this point, he's really the guy, again, that comes in late in games, and again, we're mentioning that because it's going to come into play later. Van Slyke had a great season that year. He makes the All-Star game. He actually finishes 4th in the MVP voting. So he really steps up. Bonilla's gone, and Van Slyke really steps up and shows he's a great player too. But it's really Bonds who carries the team on his back offensively. I talked about how Willie Mays and Bobby Bonds taught him to have that chip on his shoulder, and maybe Pendleton getting the MVP the year before, and then Bonilla leaving. Because I think they had moved Bonds into the cleanup position that year after Bonilla left. And I think Bonds.
That's right. Bonds used to lead off early in his career. He was the lead off because I remember him like I remember one time I came home, my grandpa was like, "Yeah, the first guy up hit a home run," and I was like, "Oh, it's Barry Bonds."
Yeah, he was the leadoff batter because of his speed. And then during the '90s teams, he batted 5th behind Bonilla and Van Slyke. And when Bonilla left, they moved him to the cleanup spot. So I mean, I don't know. Maybe he just feels like he has a lot to prove that year. He hits 34 home runs, drives in 103 runs, steals 39 bases, and does all this despite being walked 127 times.
Who bats 6th? Whoever is batting 6th is getting a lot of opportunity.
Well, 5th because Bonds batted 4th.
Yeah,
that year.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
Whoever is batting 5th is like you're always batting with a man on base, pretty much.
It was Merced. Merced batted 5th that year.
Yeah.
Yep. That was good for him.
Yeah.
So Bonds is easily named MVP this time. I mean, however many sports writers didn't like him, had no choice but to vote for him as MVP that year. He just was that dominant. So highlights of that season, there really aren't a lot of dramatic games. I mean, by this point, the Pirates were sort of a veteran group of winners. And, the closest anybody came to giving them a run was the Expos, who tied them for first place in July. But then after that, the Pirates go on a 12-1 stretch of games where it was entirely against the Cardinals and Mets, but they go 12-1, and they never look back from there. They're in first place, and they win the division for a 3rd year in a row. Probably the biggest highlight of that season happens on July 31st, when the Pirates call up a pitcher from AAA Buffalo by the name of Tim Wakefield. And Tim Wakefield's quite the story. He's a pretty mediocre minor league first baseman who, most people agreed he's never going to make it to the majors. And one day he just starts fooling around with a knuckleball, and all of a sudden he becomes a pitcher. And so, Steve, I don't know if you can describe what a knuckleball is and a knuckleball pitcher.
Well, knuckleball is you hold it. It's just like it describes. You hold it with your knuckles, and the purpose of doing that is so you don't put if you're throwing a curve or even a fastball, there's a lot of spin on the ball, and those pitches can either go straight or move due on how you spin it. Like a curve or a slider, I think they spin opposite ways. Well, a knuckleball is like the antithesis of all of that. The knuckleball is a pitch that has no spin or very little, and it isn't thrown at 90 miles an hour. It's only thrown at 50 to 60 miles an hour, But it goes, number one, if the speed difference doesn't really kind of mess with you, the ball, like, just because it has no spin on it, it's really kind of unpredictable. Like, even the pitchers who throw it, like, you can't really predict what it's going to do. Like, it'll hit the strike zone, but it kind of, like, it ducks and, like, it just does a lot of weird stuff. Like, it'll move side to side, it'll move up and down. It's really a very unpredictable pitch. And there's not a lot of people that can throw it, never mind throw it for strikes. Like, who was the Charlie Huff, wasn't he? Yeah, he was in knuckleballer.
Or the Necro brothers.
Yeah, Phil Necro. Well, when he wasn't like putting his emery board on the baseball.
But you're right. It's not a common thing.
There aren't very many, and normally the guys that pitch forever who do it, like they're like 60. You know, I'm excited. They pitch well into their 40s.
Yeah, because
it's not taxing on your arm. It's not like a curveball where you got to flick.
Right.
Yeah, and if you can consistently do it, you'll last forever.
And that's why in Wakefield, he's not even a pitcher. He's a first baseman.
Well, he just started goofing around. I remember this story because he just started goofing around in the outfield, like throwing it, and they were like, "Wait a minute, can you do that from the mound?" It's like,
yeah, and he makes it to the major leagues. Not only makes it to the major leagues, he strikes out 10 in his first outing, earning a complete game victory, and then he goes 8-1 the rest of the season with a 2.15 ERA. So in the last 2 months of the season, he's 8-1. It's just like a phenomenon in Pittsburgh. And, you talked about that pitch being hard to hit. The way Sid Bream described it, he said, quote, "Imagine being on a trampoline and trying to catch a ball while you're jumping up and down. That's what it's like with a good knuckleball." And I feel like, we did an episode recently about Cordell Stewart, and we talked about how when he came into the NFL, like teams just didn't know how to game plan for him. They had like no answer. Yeah. And I feel like that's how it was with Wakefield in '92. Like nobody had an answer for Tim Wakefield. So now this team that is already really good, has the best player in baseball in Barry Bonds, is going to head into the playoffs with this like new weapon. And in the playoffs, they're going to face Atlanta again because now Atlanta's no longer the, Cinderella darling. They're now a really good team, and it should be an exciting matchup. But what I remember going into the series was just this like sense of foreboding doom
because of the last 2 years.
Because of the last 2 years, and the game one, I remember that night I went to get a haircut, and the lady was like, "Oh, game one tonight. Are you excited?" And I remember I said no. I'm like, "No, I'm not excited. This is like they're going to blow it again." And sure enough, the Pirates dropped the first 2 games in Atlanta. Both games were blowouts. Both have the same old story of the star players not doing anything. The one game, the only run of the game for the Pirates is a Jose Lean solo home run. I don't have it in front of me how many home runs Jose Lean hit in his career. I bet it's less than 20. When Jose Lean home run is your only run of the game, that's bad. That's really, really bad. So the Pirates are down 0-2 right away. Game 3, Wakefield pitches a complete game. He beats Glavine. So Wakefield's stepping it up. But Atlanta wins game 4 to take a 3-1 series lead. And honestly, at this point, it's like, okay, it's over. 3 years in a row. We know, we've seen this movie before. We know how it ends. But then everything kind of changes in game 5. So Leland makes a really interesting decision in game 5. He trots out Bob Walk to start the game. Bob Walk, at this point in his career, he's been playing forever. He's in his late 30s.
He actually played for Atlanta, I do believe.
Yeah, he probably did.
Yeah.
Back probably when Hank Aaron was his teammate.
Yeah.
I mean, he had been around for a long time. And he was in the bullpen at this point. He wasn't a starting pitcher anymore. But Leland takes a gamble. He sends Bob Walk out to start this game. And Walk pitches a great game. And Bonds actually starts hitting. He has 2 hits in this game, one of which is an RBI double. So hang on to something. Barry Bonds is hitting the ball. Game 6, so that keeps the Pirates alive for a game 6. And game 6 is again Wakefield versus Glavine. And again, Wakefield goes the distance for a complete game victory. Glavine doesn't even make it out of the second inning. That's an inning where the Pirates score 8 runs en route to a 13-4 blowout. And in that inning, Bonds hits, wait for it, a home run.
Woo!
The all-time home run leader, the greatest home run hitter in baseball history.
Finally hits a home run.
Finally hits a home run in a playoff game after 3 years. So that sets up a Game 7 in Atlanta. with all of the momentum completely shifted back to the Pirates. Like, oh my gosh, now the series is tied. Now, like, uh-oh, the Pirates are hitting the ball. My goodness, this might actually happen. So that brings us to October 14th, 1992, to Game 7. The matchup is Drabek, who's lost both of his games in the series, versus Smoltz, who's won both of his games. The Pirates score in the top of the first. Alex Cole walks, Van Slyke doubles, and then Merced hits a sacrifice fly to get Cole home. The Pirates score again in the sixth inning. Van Slyke singles home Bell. And then in the bottom of the sixth, the Braves really have a chance to blow the game open. They're down 2-0 at this point, but they lead off the inning with 3 straight singles, and they have the bases loaded, nobody out, with the 2, 3, 4 hitters due up. So I mean, this could be a huge inning for Atlanta to just, at the very least, come back and tie the game, if not take a big lead. But Jeff Blauser lines a ball to third base, and Jeff King catches it. It's like a hard line drive. And Jeff King catches it standing close to third base and is able to step on third base to double up Mark Lemke, who had been on third base. And then Pendleton's up next, and he lines out to left field. And that's it. The inning's over. So they had nobody out, bases loaded, with their best hitters coming up. And the Pirates get out of it. And other than that little scare, Drabek is on fire. He's not allowing anything. In the eighth inning, the Pirates have a chance to add to their lead. Jeff King hits a double. And Merced, I believe, was on first at the time. He tries to go home, but David Justice makes a really good throw and nails Merced at home plate. That ends up being a big play, because if the Pirates could have gotten a third run there, obviously, as we know from what happened later, that would have been huge. Something else very significant happens in the middle of this game. So the home plate umpire in this game is a guy named John McSherry. And John McSherry, in the middle of the game, starts feeling very nauseous and dizzy, and he has to take himself out of the game. And he's replaced by the first base umpire, because who else is going to replace him? So the first base umpire has to move behind home plate. And the first base umpire is a guy named Randy Marsh, and Randy Marsh completely alters the strike zone. McSherry had a much looser strike zone. Marsh's strike zone was super tight. You had to have it like right down the middle of the square, or else it was a ball. It ends up really costing the Pirates later. McSherry was a very respected umpire, a very good umpire. He's also was a very large and unhealthy man. He very sadly and very tragically, a few years later, he's behind home plate in a game in Cincinnati, and he literally drops dead of cardiac arrest while calling a game in Cincinnati. And so this was kind of like, unfortunately, a sign of things to come for McSherry. He was not in a good place health-wise. And in this game, that ends up being a factor, him coming out. So the Pirates take a 2-0 lead into the bottom of the ninth inning.
Here we go.
And man, it's like, I remember, Steve, I remember the commercial break between the top of the ninth and bottom of the ninth.
I remember the last 3 just seemed like they took forever.
Yeah. And I just remember sitting there like, okay, this is like 3 years of being probably the best team in baseball, and now we're 3 outs away from the World Series. Like, come on, no drama, just get 3 fly balls, make this really easy. Drabek is left in the game to finish it. Pendleton's up first, and he leads off the inning with a double. So right away, it's like, oh no, a double.
And with no outs. Yeah, whenever you give up a hit with no outs, that's always a bad sign.
It was.
Yeah.
David Justice is up next. He hits a ground ball to second base to Lind, who misplays the ball for an error. And so now he's on base. This play, I mean, you want to talk about...
This is one of those, infamous... Yeah.
Well, sports irony, right? If you just want to talk about like sports irony, I mean, so
this is probably the equivalent of the Bill Buckner of.
Oh, I think it's more the equivalent of like Gary Anderson missing the field goal after he had made every field goal the whole season,
Yeah.
because Jose Lind didn't make errors. Like Bill Buckner was old and broken down at that point. Like Jose Lind. So just to explain how good Jose Lind was at second base. So during this era, the best second baseman in the National League was a guy named Ryne Sandberg for the Cubs. Ryne Sandberg's in the Hall of Fame. Ryan Sandberg was a good hitter. He was also an excellent fielder. Ryan Sandberg won the Gold Glove at second base for the National League 9 years in a row. Like that was automatic. Who wins Gold Glove? Oh, it's Ryan Sandberg. Ryan Sandberg.
9 times.
Yeah, every year it's Ryan Sandberg. Well, guess who breaks that streak in 1992?
One Chico Lean.
Yes. Like, that was the year that they finally said, you know what, there's finally a better second baseman than Ryan Sandberg. And it was Jose Lean, and he makes an error.
And it wasn't a hard play, too.
No.
It's pretty routine.
It was routine.
Even by, like bad second baseman standards.
99, not even 99 times out of 100, 999 times out of 1,000, Lean makes that play with no problem. And in the bottom of the ninth inning of Game 7, he boots it. That was just
So they
unbelievable.
not only did they give up a double out with nobody out, they gave up, an extra out too. So
Yes.
now they got to get 4 outs instead of 3.
Yep, basically. The next guy up is Sid Bream, and who Drabek is very good friends with. He walks him on 4 pitches. So now the bases are loaded. There's still nobody out. Ron Gant is due up next. He's a very dangerous hitter. And Leland decides to take Drabek out of the game, and he sends in Stan Belinda. And this is a decision that's met with a lot of controversy because a lot of people felt like he should have put in Wakefield in that moment. Wakefield, of course, had beaten Atlanta twice already. He was the on fire. He was the hot hand.
And it was probably so Game 6 was in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah.
I don't remember, but to your point about
There was probably a day in between.
there was probably a day in between. But to your point about a knuckleball pitcher,
he shouldn't be tired.
he shouldn't be. His arm's not going to be sore the way it would be for another pitcher.
And it's only 3 out. It's only 1 inning.
Well, and didn't the Giants do this with Madison Bumgarner one year when they won the World Series? Like they had him pitch on like one day, like they had him close
well, that
out.
was later, yeah.
But they had him close out Game 7 after he had pitched Game 6.
Yeah.
And he wasn't even a knuckleball pitcher. So the point being, Wakefield could have come in. Like that wasn't the problem. I think it was more just that for Leland, Belinda was his closer. You have to come with the ride the horse that brought you there, and also maybe he didn't want to put a rookie in. Wakefield was a rookie. I mean, he was on fire, but he's maybe you don't want to put a rookie in the bottom of the ninth of Game 7 with the bases loaded. And honestly, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about that in a minute, whether or not that was the right decision. But so Ron Gant's up. He hits a sacrifice fly that goes kind of dangerously deep. Like I remember when he first hit that, I thought it was a grand slam, and the game was over. But it ends up being a sacrifice fly that scores Pendleton to make it 2-1. So now there's 1 out, 2 guys on. Damon Berryhill is up next, and this at bat is real controversial because there are 2 pitches that are for sure strikes if McSherry is still in the game at umpire, but because Marsh is now behind home plate, they're both called balls, and Damon Berryhill walks. And that's where the umpire change really hurt the Pirates because Berryhill should have struck out. And instead,
that would have been 2 outs.
And that would have been 2 outs. And instead, he's on first base. Now the bases are loaded again with 1 out. And that brings up Brian Hunter. And all he has to do is hit another sacrifice fly and the game's tied, or a fielder's choice or something, right? But to Belinda's credit, he gets Hunter to pop up. So Hunter pops up, which means nobody can advance.
Right.
So now there's 2 outs.
See, that's what you need out of the bull. You always need a pop-up guy.
Yes.
Especially with men at third, yeah.
Yeah. So now the Pirates catch a break there. So now it really comes down to one final at bat. The Pirates are still up 2-1, but now there's 2 outs. The bases are still loaded. So now it's down to this one last at bat, and it's the pitcher's turn to bat in the order. So Cox wants to send in a pinch hitter. There's only one guy. There's only one position player left on the bench, and it's a guy named Francisco Cabrera. Cabrera is like the definition of a no-name scrub player. He only has 11 plate appearances all season, and he's only on the roster because Greg Olson, their other catcher, had been injured on a home plate collision a few weeks before the playoffs. So that's the only reason Cabrera is even on the roster. Meanwhile, Bream is standing on second base representing the winning run. And he says later on that he cannot understand why he is standing on second base. He says, he was just such a slow runner at the time. He had had 6 knee operations, and he is totally perplexed as to why Cox hasn't taken him out of the game for a pinch runner. And he knows like Cox didn't have any position players left, but he honestly thinks in his head, put Tom Glavine out there, right? Like put a pitcher out there. That pitcher would run better than me.
Jeez.
That's what Bream's thinking. But Cox also realizes like the game could go into extra innings. He can't necessarily do that. He's out of players. So he leaves Bream on second base. Bream takes actually a really huge lead off of second. He says like if the Pirates would have noticed and called a pickoff, he would have been picked off easily. But either the Pirates don't notice, or maybe they just don't want to call a pickoff to second
Throw it
base.
into center field,
Right.
And then
Right. So, Bream's,
or like they even if they catch like Bream in a rundown, then the runner from third's definitely gonna come home no matter what.
yeah. I mean, it probably wouldn't have been the smartest thing to try to pick him off, but he could have been picked off. So Cabrera's up at the plate. The first 2 pitches are balls, and then the third pitch he lines a foul ball real hard to left field. And at this point, Van Slyke theorizes that if Cabrera makes contact again, he's going to pull the ball somewhere left of center. He's not going to hit it opposite field. The way he's swinging the bat, he thinks he's going to pull the ball. So Van Slyke moves in so that if the ball comes to him, that he'll have a chance to throw out Bream at home plate. And he motions to Bonds to do the same thing over in left field, and Bonds responds by giving him the finger.
Wow, I didn't know that. Is that a true? Wow.
Well, that's a
Barry Bonds.
That's Van Slyke's side of the story. I'm not sure we've ever heard Bonds' side of the story or heard him refute that, but I mean, it's Barry Bonds. Do you not believe it? Bonds and Van Slyke are. There's a lot of bad blood there. Bonds had once referred to Van Slyke as the Great White Hope. Rich Donnelly, the Pirates coach, said that, quote, those two never spoke to one another except for when Andy said, I got it, when there was a fly ball. He said that was literally the only time they ever spoke to each other. So Bonds isn't about to take fielding advice from Van Slyke. On the next pitch, Cabrera makes contact again, and this time he lines a grounder to left field. He gets a base hit. Justice scores the tying run, and Bream is running from second base. The third base coach for the Braves holds up the stop sign for Bream. He does not want him trying to score because the ball's rolling to Barry Bonds, who's a very good fielder, and he knows Bream's super slow. But Bream doesn't even see him. He's like, for Sid Bream, it's home plate or bust. So he just keeps running. Bonds fields the ball, and he makes, there's a lot said about the throw that Bonds makes to home plate. A lot of people blame Barry Bonds for this, and it's not the best throw. It is definitely offline, but only slightly. It wasn't like a terrible throw.
I mean, if it would have been online, it would have had to have been a perfect throw.
It would have had to have been a perfect throw. I mean, Bream is, I think people remember that Bream was slow, and he was. He was horribly slow.
Well, he had that big lead, and the ball wasn't like that sharply hit.
And there were 2 outs. So with 2 outs, as soon as that
gone,
sound, you're just taken off. If there was 1 out and you had to wait to see if it was, a catch or whatever, you wouldn't have had that. But there was 2 outs, so he can run with that big lead right away. Bonds makes a throw that's slightly offline, slightly to LaVallier's right. LaValliere catches it, tries to dive at Bream. It's a split second too late. LaValliere always said if he was 6 inches taller, Bream is out. But LaValliere was kind of pudgy and short, and he can't reach. And Bream's safe, and the game's over, and the Braves win. The Braves win. The lasting image of that game that I'll always remember is, everybody's going crazy, and Atlanta's all mobbing Bream at home plate. I remember Van Slyke sitting in center field. His hat's kind of disheveled. He's just sitting down in center field with this like blank look on his face. And he knows that's the end of the Pirates, not only for that season, but that's the end of them being a competitive team. And I kind of feel like I was sitting in the same position on my family room floor. Just was sitting there staring at the TV.
I remember that. Yeah, he was kind of like, he wasn't on his knee, but he just kind of had his head down and, sitting in center field. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Cabrera is the only hitter in postseason history, this is a weird stat, to win a series with a hit and an at-bat during which an out would have resulted in a series loss. So this has never happened in baseball before, where you had an at-bat where if you get a hit, your team wins. If you get an out, your team loses, for the season.
Yeah.
Like literally an at-bat to decide one of those two teams.
The game was tied in the 60 World Series.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the score that Joe Carter.
Well, that was Game 6.
Oh, okay.
So that wasn't elimination.
Yeah.
So this is the only time where literally one team's season is going to end depending on a hit or an out. So that's a unique moment in baseball history. Think about all the the history of baseball. That's the only time that's ever happened. The other thing, looking back on this inning, the Braves only got 2 hits in that entire inning. The leadoff double and then the Cabrera hit, and the rest were walks and the error. Like, it's just hard to believe looking back that they were down 2-0 and they won the game by getting only 2 hits. So that was painful. I mean, it was just painful. The aftermath of this, it was really like a funeral. It really was. I mean, it was devastating. People were so sad. I was devastated because you knew not only did the Pirates lose after being so close, they were so close to finally winning the pennant, but then you knew like this is probably going to be the end of this run. Rich Donnelly, the Pirates coach, told this story. He had a son who was like in that like maybe 19, 20 years old kind of age range, and he said his son cried so much that night that his eye got infected, and then when he went to the doctor the next day because his eye got infected, the doctor and the nurses there were like, well, what happened? And he told them the story, and then they all started crying. So it was just like the whole town was in like mourning mode. Bonds signs a huge deal with the San Francisco Giants, his father's team. His last play ever as a Pirate is the throw that did not get Bream. Drabek signs a huge deal with the Houston Astros. Jose Lean is traded. He unfortunately develops a cocaine problem, ends up in prison. Belinda is traded to the Kansas City Royals. Wakefield is named the opening day starter for 1993. He quickly flames out and is sent back to the minors and is eventually released, and then is ultimately picked up by the Boston Red Sox, where he becomes one of the greatest pitchers in the history of that franchise. We talked about that in our 20 Years of Suck episode, how the Pirates just made a lot of bad moves after this, and giving up on Wakefield too early was definitely one of those moves. Leland sticks around until 1997. That's when like Jay Bell, Jeff King, sort of those last pieces. Vance Lyke's gone by then. All those pieces are gone. Leland finally leaves. He wins the World Series with Florida. The Pirates go on to set a North American professional sports record by compiling 20 consecutive losing seasons. Again, we did a whole episode about that run of 20 pathetic years and all the terrible moments and moves that they made to just keep extending that streak. And I think that the Sid Slid, as they call it in Atlanta, I think it's the worst moment in Pittsburgh sports history because it literally destroys an entire franchise. I mean, whatever other terrible moment you want to bring up, the Penguins losing to the Islanders or the Neil O'Donnell interception, it didn't like ruin the franchise for decades, and this one did. So to me, it's the single worst moment in Pittsburgh sports history. I think it's honestly because of the impact, because of the 3 years leading up to it, and then what it did afterwards. I think it's probably like in the top 3 worst sports moments of all time in terms of fan devastation. And for me, it was I talked about how I loved baseball then, and I kind of felt like that was the end of all that, and it was for me. I was much more apathetic to baseball after this. Like that love, that romanticism, the baseball cards, and the staying up late to watch baseball tonight, that was all gone. I was a teenager, and then for me, like baseball was like a kid thing. I just didn't love it anymore, and that didn't happen to me with any other sport. And I really feel like that this moment was the turning point for me as a fan.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like other teams that have gone, like the Browns maybe, or the closest thing I could think of, like because like we said, the Pirates have 5 World Series, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, 5. That's 6th most all time, And really, during the ownership of the Galbraiths, they were a very successful team. In the 70s, they were very successful. The 60s, they won a World Series. Even in the 60s, they were still competitive. And after this, boy, it's really gone downhill. Like, that's the only thing I can compare. Like, the Browns, like, have all those championships with, Paul Brown, and even up to when Belichick was there in the 90s. And as soon as, Art Modell moved the team to Baltimore, boy, it's been nothing since they came back. I mean, they've had one playoff game, and there was a blowout to your rival. I mean, a big comeback loss to your rival. So, I mean, that's the only thing. And, like, now the Pirates, I mean, they're going on 40 years now without winning a World Series. And I think that's the longest stretch they've gone in the team history without winning a World Series. And, I mean, even now, I looked up the other people that have had longer streaks, like just other teams in general. Let's see. It was, I know, of course, the Red Sox. Everybody.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of that.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, Red Sox are 85 years. Well, the Red Sox were 85 years. The longest was the Cubs at 107 years. The White Sox at 87. The Phillies at 77. So, I mean, there's still some time. The Pirates got some time there to get it together before they catch some of these other teams' records. But
yeah, I mean, unless they have some kind of change in ownership, I think they'll be well on their way to 80, 90, 100 years at this point. And it's just sad because this was their chance. This was their big chance, and they were so close. And you mentioned that, like, the Browns had, like, the move, but, like, to have like a moment, like a moment, a sports moment, like, be the absolute turning point. It's so devastating to watch even to this day.
And I even remember the day after, like the news would show, like, I don't know why they were down at the stadium showing the Pirates, like, pack up and leave, and, like, Bob Walk, like, he had, like, they gave out those little foam hooks, like, it was just so sad, like you said, just like them packing up, and everybody was so sad, and everybody knew that Bonds was gone, and that was probably going to be the end of them being competitive without, it was. I can't think of a more devastating Pittsburgh sports moment off the top of my head, quite honestly. I really can't.
No.
I mean, besides Clemente dying in the plane crash.
Well, sure. But I mean,
on the field,
yeah.
But even the Pirates won a World Series after that,
right.
and were competitive after that. So,
yeah, it's just awful. And it's sad because, again, this was a really fun time for Pittsburgh baseball. And I almost, even if they would have lost that, they were down 3-1. Had Bob Walk stunk in Game 5 and they had just lost,
it probably wouldn't have been it would have been more forgettable. Like, well, those teams never really achieved.
Right, and it still would have been, disappointing to look back on. But just that knife in the gut way to lose that game in that series.
Francisco Cabrera.
Yeah,
that'll live in infamy.
Yep, and
this Sid Bream too, like you said, like he still lives in Western Pennsylvania.
Well, and if you want to take one bright spot out of this whole disaster, it's that Sid Bream gets to relive this moment for the rest of his life.
Well, never have to pay for a meal in Atlanta, that's for sure.
No, and every 10-year retrospective and 15-year retrospective and 20-year retrospective that Bob Costas hosts, he's the guy that gets to sit there and be interviewed. He's because honestly, I mean, not a lot of people would remember Sid Bream to this day if it weren't for this moment. Yeah. So good on him. Good for him. A guy that got totally screwed over by the Pirates, got to at least have something that he could live off of for the rest of his life. So if you want to take one bright spot out of this, is that, he was a good guy and good for him. But from the Pittsburgh side, man, it just hurts. Like, it's so
a whole
bittersweet.
generation of fans lost baseball because of this play. It's hard to, you know what I mean?
That's very true.
They lost a whole generation of fans.
Yep, on one play.
Yeah.
On one hit. Well,
yeah.
If you're not sufficiently depressed.
Next we'll be talking about war and disease.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Please check us out on the web, Facebook, or Twitter. Those links are all in the description of our podcast. And please go rate us on whatever service you're listening to. If you like what you hear, that helps other people find us. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Bye bye.